All right, so data centers, right? Everyone's talking about them, but what's got everyone looking at Norway as like the place to be?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Like they're suddenly on the map as this data center haven.
Exactly. And for you listening, clearly you're ahead of the curve, already curious about this whole Norway thing. So we dove into the research, the articles, all of it. Honestly, Norway's got some serious advantages just baked in.
Well, the big one, everyone's talking about it, hydropower. But we're not just talking renewable energy here. It's 95% of their electricity coming from, the force of water.
Okay, so they've got a lot of power. That's cool and all. But is it really enough for these massive data centers? Like, what are we even talking about here?
So that's the thing. It's not just keeping the lights on. Some reports suggest Norway could handle multiple data centers, each needing, wait for it, 5 gigawatts each.
5 gigawatts? I honestly don't even know what that means practically.
Think of it this way. You could power a city, like the size of Miami, with that much energy. Just one data center.
Okay, Miami, got it. That's a lot of juice. But aren't these centers also notorious for generating a ton of heat? Isn't cooling them a huge part of the cost?
100% right. Cooling is massive in this industry. But here's another win for Norway. They've got that naturally cool climate. So right off the bat, they're not fighting an uphill battle with AC, like, say, a desert data center.
So they're already ahead, but then there's this whole thing about them using seawater for cooling, too. What's the deal with that?
Right. It's fascinating. Using that cold seawater, always there, to cut down on the typical energy-guzzling cooling systems. Potential for huge cost savings, even more energy efficiency. It's a big deal.
Talk about working with what you've got, but location, right? Like real estate, it matters for data too. Where does Norway even fit into all this?
Huge point. They're in this sweet spot geographically close to Europe, obviously, but also they've got those high-speed fiber optic cables directly to the U.S. And we're talking speed of light data transfer here, which matters when milliseconds count in, say, financial trading.
So faster speeds, better online experience, all that good stuff. But what's this I keep hearing about data sovereignty?
Yeah, that's becoming a big factor. Basically, it's countries wanting more control over their citizens' data, where it's stored, how it's used. So companies, they're now looking to keep data closer to customers to comply with these new regulations. And guess who's perfectly positioned between the U.S. and European markets?
Norway? They're like the Switzerland of data, right? Neutral ground. But it sounds like it's not just nature giving them an edge. What's the government doing to, actually make this happen?
Oh, they are not just sitting back. They're practically rolling out the red carpet for data centers.
Okay, seriously, what does that even look like? Give me the details.
Think tax breaks specifically for these companies. Financial incentives to use green tech, making the whole process smooth to get these centers up and running fast.
So they're making it financially attractive, pushing for sustainability. Smart. But I'm guessing it's not just about attracting the tech giants, right?
You got it.
Yeah.
One of those interesting things is how Norway is also focusing on rural development. They see data centers as a way to bring high-tech jobs and investment to those smaller communities outside the big cities.
Okay, so we've got eco-friendly power, the location is prime, the government's all in, and potential benefits spread across the country. It's starting to sound like Norway's got it all figured out. Are we getting ahead of ourselves here?
Right.
There have to be some challenges, right? Yeah, no, for sure. It seems like every time we talk about something being the green option, it usually comes with a higher price tag. Is that part of the equation here in Norway?
It's definitely part of the conversation. Norway, they've got these really, really high environmental standards they hold themselves to. And that makes construction, especially something as big as a data center, a lot more complex. More planning, more care to minimize that ecological impact. And yeah, that all adds to the cost.
And I imagine building in those beautiful but often remote locations probably throws another wrench in the works, logistically speaking.
Oh, absolutely. You got to factor in things like transporting materials, finding skilled workers in less populated areas. It adds up quickly. So the big question becomes, can those long-term energy savings really balance out those higher upfront costs? Some articles we looked at were optimistic, others not so much.
A classic case of weighing the risks and rewards, I guess. But, okay, even if those costs even out, I keep thinking about the sheer amount of power these data centers need. Can Norway's grid even handle that, even with all that hydropower?
Million-dollar question right there. Even with all that green energy, the grid itself needs a serious upgrade just to make sure it's reliable and can handle the capacity. Imagine if you had multiple 5-gigawatt centers all drawing power, and suddenly there's a surge in demand.
Yeah.
You don't want the system crashing just as someone's, making a crucial stock trade or something.
Or worse, interrupting someone's in the middle of a movie. But yeah, okay. Reliable power is essential, especially for those big players in AI and cloud computing, which Norway's trying to attract. Those guys need things to run smoothly.
For sure. Those fields are power hungry. They need things running 24/7. Any little blip, any outage could be a disaster. And the research we looked at really emphasized that. Grid stability and capacity, those aren't just suggestions for Norway. They're necessities if they want to be taken seriously in this space.
So it sounds like there's a lot of work to do infrastructure-wise for them to reach their full potential. But let's say they nail it. Green energy's flowing, the grid's rock solid. You mentioned competition earlier.
Right. Almost forgot. It's important to remember that Norway isn't the only Nordic country vying for a piece of this data center pie.
Right, of course. Sweden, Finland, Iceland, they've all got some of those same appealing qualities we talked about, don't they? So what makes Norway stand out, if anything?
That is the real question, isn't it? And that's what makes this whole thing so interesting. Each of those countries has its own strengths, its own weaknesses. Some, like Iceland, they've got even more potential when it comes to geothermal energy. Others, like Sweden, they've got a history of these big industrial projects, which translates well to something like data center development. It's really a mixed bag.
So how do we even begin to unpack that? Like, what are the deciding factors here? What's going to determine who comes out on top in this Nordic digital race?
Okay, so we've talked about what Norway's bringing to the table, the green energy, that prime location, the government backing, but also the challenges like cost and stiff competition.
Yeah.
So where does that leave us? Is Norway really going to become like the data center capital of the North?
From everything we've seen, it's less about being the capital and more about finding their own lane. What really came through in the research is that success for Norway hinges on really playing to their strengths.
Those are.
Sustainability and strategic partnerships. Think back to all that hydropower, those innovative cooling solutions we talked about. It's not just good PR. It's appealing to these companies that are, frankly, under more and more pressure to clean up their act, environmentally speaking. Makes sense with all the talk about big tech's carbon footprint and everything.
Right. And that's where those partnerships come in. Some of the most promising stuff we saw involved Norwegian companies teaming up with these international players, sharing knowledge, attracting investment, basically building this network that makes Norway even more attractive.
So it's not about going it alone. It's more like finding the right collaborators to make the whole thing work even better.
Exactly. It's like this. Norway's got the green energy, the location that links everything. And their partners, they bring that super high-level tech expertise and that global reach. Everybody wins. Norway becomes this hub for sustainable data centers without having to, take over the whole market single-handedly.
That's interesting. So it's bigger than just the tech itself. It's about how they position themselves within the bigger picture. But let's zoom out even more for a second. What if this whole Norway data center experiment actually works? What happens then?
Now, that's the exciting part. If Norway pulls this off this model for sustainable, efficient, globally connected data centers, the impact could be huge. It could easily ripple out way beyond their borders. Imagine. Other countries, other companies, all looking to Norway for inspiration.
They become the gold standard, basically. What would that even look like in reality?
Well, on a practical level, we could see a lot more data centers popping up in places that have those abundant renewable energy sources, more adoption of those cooling technologies like that seawater solution we were talking about. But even bigger than that, I think it could change how we think about technology and the environment, period.
Instead of being at odds, technology actually becomes a force for sustainability. That's a pretty powerful idea.
It really is. And honestly, we're just scratching the surface here. What Norway is doing, whether they realize it or not, it's laying the groundwork for a whole different kind of digital future, a more sustainable one.
Wow. Okay, that is definitely something to think about. So it's not just about data centers in Norway. It's potentially about a whole new way of approaching how we power and connect our digital lives. What a fascinating deep dive. Definitely something we'll keep an eye on. And for you listening, here's a thought. What other industries, what other parts of our lives could be transformed by this kind of innovative, sustainability-focused thinking? Until next time.